Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar for this year's UPS and Startup Canada Women's Exporter Program. My name is Nadia. I'm the program lead for the program here. And to begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I'm on today is located on the unceded territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of all Indigenous peoples, and I encourage each of you to take a moment to reflect and acknowledge the traditional territory that you are each residing on today. Now, today's session is being recorded and it will be shared afterwards in case you miss anything or want to rewatch it, or to even share with someone who you think will benefit from the webinar. We invite each of you to introduce yourself and to connect with one another in the chat. Feel free to share your name, your organization, where you're joining in from, and even a link to your LinkedIn. And make sure that you're sending it to everyone in the room because Zoom does default to send it to the host and the panelists. So make sure it's set to send to everyone. Now, a bit about Startup Canada. Startup Canada is a national nonprofit organization that is the gateway to Canada's entrepreneurial ecosystem. We're here to connect entrepreneurs with the support, community, and tools that they need to build a successful business in Canada. Since launching in 2012, we've grown to support more than 130,000 entrepreneurs annually from coast to coast to coast. And in partnership with UPS Canada, we're proud to present this program. It's a global initiative to bridge the gender gap in education and export participation by providing targeted assistance to women-owned small and medium-sized businesses. Now, a bit about this webinar specifically. The word operations encompasses many aspects of the business, and whether that's customs, 3PL, logistics, shipping, manufacturers, there's so much to know about operations, and it can be overwhelming at times. But by the end of this webinar, we're here to provide an overview of what that operations plan and strategy looks like. And we have two amazing guest speakers that are joining us today who are going to provide you with tangible and real world advice. We're going to start with a presentation from UPS, followed by that panel with the subject matter experts. And we have some questions prepared, but as always, we want to hear from you. So if you do have any questions throughout this entire session, please make sure to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer those questions live. Now, without further ado, I'm excited to present it over to our first speaker of the day, which is Felipe, the Marketing Manager of Small Business at UPS Canada.
Thank you, Nadia. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today as we continue this important journey of supporting women-led businesses to get ready to scale around the world. Today, we're getting a little more hands-on as we focus on different aspects of the operations, customs, and logistics related to exporting. My presentation will mainly focus on shipping. I will leave the panel the task to dive deep in other logistics, customs, and operation topics. So let's get to it. Next slide, please. As I just mentioned, my presentation will focus on shipping. So the first step is to understand the basics of shipping. We will start by talking about the modes of transportation. I don't think I will surprise anyone if I said moving products across borders and oceans is different than across the streets and provinces. In this slide, you can see the different modes of transportation for shipping goods, including air, ocean, rail, truck, and courier. You have to keep in mind that each mode has its advantages and disadvantages, depending on the type of product being shipped, the destination, and the timeline. I really want to bring your attention to these last two terms, destination and timeline. Why? Because if you are aware of these two factors and manage them, you could also manage your transportation cost more efficiently. Keep in mind that the greater the distance your product needs to travel, or the shorter the timeline for the delivery, which could request a faster service, the higher the cost for your business. You could be asking yourself how to find the right balance between cost and modes of transportation. I have one word for you. It's planning in advance. Planning your logistics with time will provide you with more options, which will save you time and ensure you that you have the right solution in place for that shipment. And this brings us to the first tip for today. Planning in advance will save you time and money. Next slide, please. After reviewing the impact of the destination and timeline and the importance of planning, Our next task is to understand your parcel characteristics. No matter who your carrier is, your shipping cost is influenced by several key elements, like distance. The shorter the distance, the lower the cost of shipping. Your weight. If the package is heavier, it's going to cost you more money when you are shipping it. The size. That's something I want to give some a little more detail to. You have to understand that the more space that your product takes into the transportation network, the higher the cost of moving that product will be. The other one is your mode of transportation. For sure, if you are choosing a faster service, will cost you more money than if you are choosing a slower service. And sometimes also you have to take into consideration the nature of the shipped goods. For example, if you're shipping high-value goods, you might want to get an insurance to your product, or if you are moving some dangerous goods, that could ask from you to get some extra paperwork, maybe extra cost to ship it to. One final point, it's mainly applicable only to the courier world, but I think it's good to note it. If your package is not in a cardboard box, there are additional costs. The reason is that if not in a cardboard, your parcel could not travel as a regular parcel and will need extra handling to be processed. In my several years of experience with UPS, I've seen several examples of products, weights, and sizes that could have been different and, as a consequence, could have saved on shipping costs if only it had been part of the planning process sooner. This realization brings me to my tip number 2. Understanding and planning how your goods will be packaged, the distance they will travel, weight, and size will help you manage the process and your expenses. Next slide, please. After you plan how you're going to ship your product and have a clear idea of the cost, you need to decide who is responsible for the other costs involved during the shipping process. You, your supplier, your distributor, or your customer. And this is tip number 3. Clearly define the responsibilities and ownership of that movement in the contract between you and your supplier, distributor, or direct customer. How do you achieve this? By using Incoterms. International commercial terms, also known as Incoterms, are a set of standardized trade terms used in international commerce to define the responsibilities and costs of buyers and sellers in a transaction. They were created to facilitate trade and provide a common language for buyers and sellers. There are 11 Incoterms in total, each of which defines the responsibilities and costs associated with different stages of the shipping process. This Incoterm has a significant impact on shipping responsibilities and, most important, on your cost. It's important for buyers and sellers to carefully consider the Incoterms they use and ensure that they are clearly defined in the contract to avoid misunderstanding and disputes. As we already mentioned in this webinar, and will continue to do in the ones coming, you don't have to do this alone. Working with a knowledgeable shipping and logistic provider can also help businesses navigate the complexities of Incoterms and ensure that your shipments are managed effectively and efficiently. Next slide, please. I want to take a few seconds to explain that in the courier world, most shipments default to a prepaid option, which is defined as DAP, delivery at place. When using this Incoterm for a transaction, the seller is responsible for arranging and paying for the transportation of the goods to the final destination, as well as insurance against loss or damage during transit. The buyer at the other end is responsible for customs clearance and all other costs and risks at the destination. Next slide, please. I want to make some final comments about the importance of proper packaging, as it will directly impact your cost and your customer's experience, and it is 100% under your control. Some best packaging practices to keep in mind: 1, ensure to use the right materials. You could Google packaging options, ask your service provider for support, or what I see some of my customers do in the past, they see what their competitors are doing. How are they packaging? How are they shipping their products? A second best practice is consider the nature of your good. For sure, if you're shipping a fragile item, you're going to need extra protection. If you ship a heavier item, you will need to use a sturdy box. Please do not forget, it is your product, your brand. Do not want your customer to receive a damaged package. One of the other best practices is test your packaging. I see it happen with customers in the past. We agreed to do some test shipments to see how their packages travel through the network before, when we are in the research period, when we are negotiating. Then before getting to the next slide, I want to share with you a question we often receive from small businesses regarding packaging. When start looking at packaging? I always shock the person by saying during your R&D phase. Yes, while you are still planning, building, testing different materials, size of the product, etc. All of these will impact your packaging requirements to safely get your products around the world or even across provinces. I want to share one example about a situation I encountered in the past. This is a shower company doing a very smart and new shower head, very nice product. The product was done, the market research was done. They have the prototype, they start getting some production from their facility in Asia. And they call us at that point and they ask us to negotiate some shipping rates. At that moment, they were surprised to realize that their product was longer than what we normally carry in a parcel world environment. And then in order for us to transport it, there is a lot of expensive additional accessories charges that will need to be assessed for this product. All that could be avoided if they, at the same time they're thinking about their product R&D, they think, how are they going to be shipping it out? And this gives us to the tip number 4. Test your package. And if needed, get help from packaging experts. Next slide, please. We have already looked at most of transportation, package characteristics, Incoterms, and packaging. All of these aspects are applicable to shipping in Canada as well as international. We're now going to talk about the unique challenge that exporting presents to any business: customs and regulations. Customs clearance refers to the process of getting goods through customs when they cross international borders. This process can involve a range of procedures, fees, and regulations. Before having a closer look to customs and regulations, I will give you our final tip of the day. Use the available export toolkits as an example for do your own research. As an example, you could access the CBSA SME toolkit to review some of the customs and regulations that might apply to your product, but there are tools like that for US and different countries. Now we will get to the final section of these presentations, the essential preparation for exporting. Next slide, please. We are identifying 5 essential preparations for exporting. The first one is knowing what your product is. You need to find commodity codes to clearly identify what it is and what it is made of. This will help you reduce potential custom issues and delays. As I said before, if you don't have this information already available, you could use some of the free online tools or ask your support or ask the support of your logistic partner. Next slide, please. The next essential preparation for exporting is knowing where your product is going. Be sure to check local country regulations about restricted goods, documentations requirements, and customs clearance before you ship. In case of doubt, look for support. Next slide, please. The third essential preparation for exporting is knowing which forms are required. Ensuring important customs forms are completed accurately may help speed clearance in your destination market. Once again, like I always said, don't be afraid to ask for help. Your partners, government agencies, always, when in case of doubt, look for support. Next slide, please. The fourth essential preparation for exporting is knowing when the package needs to get there. We already reviewed it in previous slides. Only remember, depending on the urgency of your shipment, there are a variety of transportation services to fit your budget and needs. As we said, planning could help you manage your shipping costs better. A point we did not touch, and you need to keep in mind, is your return process. I am not going to get into this, but I'm sure the panel following this presentation will share some thoughts about returns and how to handle them. Next slide, please. The final essential preparation for exporting, it's knowing how to prepare your package. International shipments can be challenging and expensive to retrieve if something goes wrong. Then at all costs, you have to avoid the potential that your package is abandoned. And for that, you have to prepare upfront. Some of the steps you need to take are you have to evaluate your packaging, as we discussed, e-filing, accurate customs documentations, we already talked about it, ensuring your products if you feel it's needed based on the nature of your products. And something that it's easy to do with AI and all the technology today is validating your customer's address information. If the address is wrong, parcel or companies that are delivering your package will not be able to deliver it. Then they're either gonna abandon it or they're either gonna be an additional cost for correcting the address, and that could damage your profits and your margins. Next, please. This is my last slide. The first thing I want to do is I want to thank you for your time. And I want to provide with some points for you to take with you. The first one is start planning your shipment and logistics needs today. Don't wait after everything is done, has to be part of your thinking process. The second one is understand, agree, and communicate what you are responsible for, because this will affect your cost and your margins. The third one, packaging needs to be considered during your R&D phase. Remember the shower head company, the example I just gave you. Fourth one, choose the right service and partner. You cannot do it alone. You're gonna need a lot of support and people that could work with you. Then choose the right service and partner. And finally, understand your customs and regulations requirements. It's international trade. There is a lot of regulations and customs compliance that you need to follow. Then that's all for me. Thank you for listening to me. Please keep enjoying this webinar. Back to you, Nadia. Thank you.
Thank you, Felipe. That was a great kickoff and a start to our webinar, and you provided such valuable information and resources that is going to feed really nicely into the panel we have today as well. So now I'd like to bring up our panel. We have Maggie, who is the CEO of LVK, which was previously ShipHero Fulfillment and the COO of ShipHero. And we have Kathleen, the founder and CEO of SullyGarman and Associates. They're both amazing operational experts, and we have a lot of amazing things that we want to dive into today. So I'll just get started. But of course, if you do have questions, feel free to drop it into the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll try and get to them as well. So to kickstart, I want to talk a little bit about supply chain. We started to touch on it a bit. But starting to understand, how can companies think about their overall supply chain when it comes to exporting and entering into new markets? Maggie, we can start with you.
Thank you so much. Again, my name is Maggie Barnett. I'm the CEO of LVK. We have 7 warehouses across North America, 2 in Canada, 5 in the US. So I hope we can add some value here. Yeah, I think the number one thing that I'm always working with brands are really understand where you want to get started. Don't just ship a container to the US. So thinking I want to go to the US, I'm just going to ship a container down and just sign up at any old 3PL. The first thing you have to do is say, really, what is my goal? Am I just direct to consumer? Am I looking for B2B? And Kathleen's an expert on some of the B2B, and she'll get into that. So I think as a brand, the first thing you think when you're trying to get into a new, go into a new country is, one, what is my goal? Am I going to go direct to consumer or B2B first? And then look and see if there are any sort of regulations that you can take advantage of. Leverage is always good. So for example, in the US, we currently have something called Section 21, or also it's been referred to as the de minimis. So anything that's under $800 being sent from you, a merchant in Canada, to me, a recipient in California, if it's one package per day from you to me under $800, there's no US tax on that. So this is a massive savings for folks. And it's something that you should look into. This is, again, very strong. This is for direct consumer. We do this at LVK. That's why we have our 2 warehouses in Canada. So that's part of the strategy. Again, these things change. You might know that there's been a little bit of a talk that we had an election here in the US. So things always change, right? Things, tariffs, customs, these items change. But Nadia, when I start, the first thing I say is like, what is my goal as the brand? Direct consumer, B2B, what is that country going to look at, and where can I find that additional savings? Because it's all about savings and optimization. So that's where I always like to get started.
I love that overview of, understanding retail, D2C, what does this look like? And I know, Kathleen, you have some experience in this as well. So what do you think are some of the tips we should consider when it comes to that, the retail versus e-commerce and D2C?
So big picture on operations, and those of you who follow me on LinkedIn have read this 5,000 times. Sales and marketing are going to drive your revenue. Operations are going to drive your profit. So one of the most important things in that is that you are proactive, not reactive. Anybody who's done ops, order management, supply chain, inventory, any of it, knows you spend a lot of your day cleaning up messes. And so that's being reactive. And that is, your profits are slipping away while you're doing that. So, pre-planning, and Maggie's right, consider all of your factors in advance so that you can be proactive and conserve those operational profits. So, my first thing is, I'd say, consider the size of the market that you want to go into and make sure the plan is consistent. So for example, selling into the UK is much smaller geographically than selling into the US. And so if you're selling into the US, you may want to start with certain geographies instead of going, I'm going to sell to everybody. I've run ops for companies that did crowdfunding Kickstarter campaigns and said, we're just going to sell to everybody. There was one that had they did 188 countries. Well, logistically, being able to get that fulfilled efficiently and profitably was slim to none, because in advance they had charged for shipping without knowing what it was going to actually cost to ship. So on that, on Maggie's point about Section 321, amazing program. A lot of people are using it, both US companies and non-US. It's not only open to if you're from a certain country, it's tied to shipping in to the US to consumers, and under $800 package and only one a day. Now, the key is consumers. So B2B orders do not qualify under Section 321. If it's shipping to a company, tariffs have to be paid as it crosses the border. So you have to have an alternative plan. Maybe you want to go into B2B and not just direct to consumer, but you're not ready yet to have a full-on warehouse in the United States. Well, so I actually worked with Maggie's team at ShipHero about this for a client. What we did is we notified all of the wholesale clients that all B2B orders were going to ship on one day a week. So they shipped all together on a Thursday. And how that worked was, when that went across the border, it went across in its own, stack of pallets. That stack got customs clearanced, and then paying the customs broker maybe $150 only happens once a week instead of for every single shipment. And then as a result, also, they only had to pay the tariffs on what went over the border at that time. So they were able to conserve cash flow until they had enough wholesale to actually move big piles of product into the US to a warehouse here. So there are ways you can use these systems to be a bridge as you scale, but it's really important, again, be proactive so you know when you're going to hit those inflection points where that once a week thing doesn't make sense anymore. Now you're looking at that thinking, oh, I'm paying brokerage once a week, that's $150 a week. Now my margins are being cut into by that, $500 a month. I'm going to move a bunch of stuff into the US because it's going to make more sense for me. So it all depends on keeping track of your inflection points and knowing where they are before you hit them.
Those are some great points. I love the point about, revenue and sales marketing drives revenue, operations drives profit, being proactive, thinking through all those points, starting with a specific region. I think a lot of investors look for that as well. If you say, your growth plan is to expand all of the US, well, that's not as specific as saying, we're going to do a pilot in the Northeast region and this is where we're going to start. So it's not only good for your operations, but even for investment and when starting to build out your growth plan. So I love a lot of those points. On the point of being proactive and thinking through some of these plans, one of the things I wanted to touch on was inventory management, because I think a lot of times companies are very reactive when it comes to inventory management. So maybe Maggie, going back to you, what are some tips you have when it comes to being proactive about inventory management and that setup?
Inventory management is key. You have to know where your product is and how much product you have so that you know what to sell. Like, you don't want to oversell, you don't want to undersell. This is just so key. So we're owned by ShipHero, which is a full service WMS, order management, inventory management. And when it's so key when you're going into a new 3PL or you're trying to expand into other regions, you have to track your inventory. For example, we have dashboards where you can see warehouse by warehouse, region by region, even if they're partners, if there's inventory allocated for intra-Canada order only. It could say, you know what, we want this inventory, but it's only going to intra-Canada. This other, 1,000 units can be dropped in for 321. Also, if they have a warehouse in the US or Australia or in Europe, you have to be able to see where all that inventory is at once. Because otherwise, like Kathleen said, anytime you're moving things last minute or trying to go air because you're like, wait, I'm running out of inventory in the UK, I'm running out of inventory in the US, or having to get things over to Australia, you've lost. You got to hold on to that margin where you can. And that's all through planning. Working with different sorts of forecasting as well is super important, because again, plan. The last person who touches your product is going to be the 3PL. And I have folks that are delivering things up until November 20th for our Thanksgiving kind of push. They're going to get extra fees if their product is delivered after that, because there's rush orders. So, and they know that, we're very transparent about it. But when you start to push your vendors or your partners at that very last mile, you're going to have to pay extra fees. So it's the planning, it's understanding, it's forecasting. I can't stress enough, and I know Kathleen and I could have lunches that turn into 3-hour lunches talking about how key it is. So you're not making getting those last minute penalties and having to go air instead of ground. So Kathleen, I don't know, I know you have some tools with that as well.
I do. And, one of the things that's important to keep in mind is, even the term inventory management, that is managing the inventory that you have. So as Maggie said, knowing which warehouse it's at, knowing maybe you have a warehouse in Florida and most of your sales are in the Midwest. Well, you better be putting the majority of inventory in Chicago, because you're going to be paying a lot of money to move it. That's inventory management. As far as managing where things are and when. There are KPIs and stats that you can use to keep track. And I'm a huge fan of analytics. I love a good spreadsheet. Order cycle time. It's not just how long it takes Maggie's team to pull the order packet, ship it out. It is how long from when the customer placed the order till the customer receives the order. So that's end to end. You're tracking your sales system and the API call to the warehouse to know how that data is flowing to the warehouse, how long that's taking, if it's getting stuck, if there are address verification that needs to happen. Then, the pick, pack, ship out, then the carrier, then you're tracking the carrier and how it's doing until it gets to that customer. Amazon, I'm going to say prior to COVID, really got everybody used to getting things really fast, getting things within 1 to 2 days. After the pandemic, I think people kind of gave up on that, like that was dead. I think we're going back to it again. People are thinking, okay, everything's running again. The consumers have a much different idea of the process than you as a brand are going to have. So communication is key, communication with your warehouse and communication with your consumers, again, for tracking that inventory. Maggie mentioned forecasting, things like your turnover rate and how fast things are moving. Keeping track of that, not on a big scale, on a per SKU scale, is really, really critical. Oh, I'm hearing some feedback. Are we okay? So then looking at other details like perfect order rate. Nobody ever thinks about that. That is the percentage of orders that are delivered without any issues at all. Again, I say we're always so reactive. We always look at the things that are going wrong, but it's really important to look at what's going right because you want to duplicate that. I know that Maggie probably has some ideas on that. That ShipHero probably has some statistics and some tools inside the WMS to be tracking some of that. So I'm going to flip it back to you, Maggie.
Yeah, I think being able, that perfect order rate, being able to track once it hits your 3PL's warehouse to when it got delivered to your customer, all of those analytics are key. I also, one thing that I see people get caught up on a lot are bundles, kit SKUs, you know, how that's formulated. So really understand if you're going to do a bundle or a kit, it's different for each 3PL and WMS, kind of how you're referring to that. You could have 6 of the SKUs of a 7 SKU bundle, and that order is going to be just as a back order. So you have to be in real-time communication about how your product, if it's a bundle, is perceived on your Shopify store, Magento store, whatever type of store you're using, Wix, you know, and make sure that you don't have one loose SKU that is creating back orders, because your 3PL is going to think they're doing a great job. All orders with that contain that all inventory is there for, they're set. And you're like, hey, I've got all these back orders. What is happening? It's usually because of a bad bundle and you're missing maybe an insert, a piece of tissue paper, a branded box, things that you might not always remember to reorder, unless, of course, like our WMS, you're able to set those reorder notifications. But be very careful with how your bundles are presented on your website and then how that flows down into the WMS. Because I see it time and time again when people just don't take that time to really understand the details around that. It can create a lot of back orders, and you know, if it's not on your site, I don't know to buy it.
Well, and inventory management isn't just about your SKUs. It's about your packaging. Say you're using custom packaging, or you have custom tape or raw materials. If you're a CPG company that is, you know, making something out of all of the materials, tracking all of those different parts are going to make a big difference for you. And knowing when you're going to have a stock out, even if it's a raw material stock out. Maybe you're looking at upcoming, you know that you're going to be out of something in 6 weeks. Well, there are decisions to be made now for when you're going to run out of something in 6 weeks. You've got to look at that and go, okay, I'm going to pull it out of all the bundles because I don't have enough run rate because my lead time on this is 12 weeks. So I'm going to pull it out of all the bundles so that I can conserve that for the people that are just wanting that one product. Maybe I'm going to de-emphasize the marketing for that product in an area where it's not as popular, so that in an area where it's more popular, I'm saving that inventory for that certain geography. So you have to be looking way ahead. My kids rode horses competitively, and their trainer always told them, don't look at the horse in front of you, look at the people 5 horses in front of you, because that's the train wreck that you're going to run into. And that applies to operations too. Be looking 5 steps ahead, play chess, not checkers, because you've got to know where the train wrecks are.
I love that. There's so many good tips being shared. And I think a couple, like you mentioned, some of the couple tools that are available to support. I think sometimes startups, when they have limited budget, limited resources, they might not know when it's time to invest in some of these tools. So I'm curious for either of you, should startups be investing in some of these inventory management tools from the front, or is there like a certain volume that they should be doing? And, you know, before then they just work off of Excel, or any tips or tricks on when to invest in some of these softwares and tools that are available to support you with inventory management?
So like I said, oh, sorry, go ahead. You want to go first, Maggie? I was going to say, your business will reach inflection points, and those are the points where you have to make a decision, and hopefully you're not too late and then you're cleaning up the mess. Inventory management at its very lowest common denominator is, what do I have at the warehouse and what is my turn rate and my sales velocity? That can just be done with a spreadsheet based on how many you're selling of each SKU in each geography, how much you have. So you can do that before the inflection point. Inventory forecasting is a completely different beast. That is, I'm going to say, it takes some unicorn magic and pixie dust, especially if you're a startup, because you don't have sales velocity from what you did last year to go on. All you have is your projections. There are some software and tools that do a really good job at that. But again, you have to always be evaluating your margins. If the tool you're putting in is too soon or too big or too expensive for your profit margins to support, it's just going to be a thing that also contributes to crushing you. So you have to know when you're going to cross over that inflection point where it's time to put in a tool. All right, your turn, Maggie.
No, that's exactly. I think, Kathleen, it's always seen the complexity of your business, 10 SKUs versus 100 SKUs versus 10 kits or 100 kits and all of those variations. You might need something earlier because of the complexity. But what I see so often with folks that are doing, between 2,000 and 5,000 orders a month, they're trying to put in a complex ERP and have everything, whether it's like a NetSuite to a Soligo to think of all of the very expensive terms. Even if you have funding, some seed funding, I really caution against putting an ERP in right away. Because most of the time, if you are going to go for funding later, they're going to make you get on their system. Like that's usually so also making those investments with what is not going to have to get ripped out later if you're taking on partners or money. Because I know I've seen a lot of brands, they got bought up by a larger brand. Let's say I had a cosmetic brand. They were bought by a huge company that owns, a portfolio of cosmetic brands. They had done all this work on an ERP and they're like, no, it's okay. Just hook into ours. Just send your Shopify data to ours and, whatever WMS you have, we'll work it out. And they're like, wow, we spent, $500,000 just implementing this over the last 3 years. And now it's like for naught. So I would say when you get to that 5,000 orders a month, you're usually probably going to need a 3PL to help you out there, unless you're opening up your own facility. And a lot of those tools should be within the WMS, not the forecasting. Again, Kathleen's super right. That is, look at the biggest companies in the world are constantly reforecasting, not just their inventory, but just their projections. So it's all guessing, right? So I would say when you get to that 5,000 to 10,000 orders, that's where it's time to get more of the inventory management. And hopefully, if you're using a 3PL, they will have some tools there. And it's like usually bundled in. It's either free as part of the service, or they might give you a $250 tech fee. And that's kind of nice because you get to kind of play with it for a few months without having to make a massive investment. So just a couple of things that I would look at as you're growing.
Yeah. And I know that this is, Startup Canada. For those of you in startups that don't know what ERP is and you're furiously Googling it, it's enterprise resource planning. And the keyword there is enterprise. You really have to be over 5 million in revenue before you even start looking at something like that. And Maggie's right. It can cost $100,000 to put it in. And it is a wonderful tool for your CFO, your operations team. All it's going to do is slow them down. So in the meantime, in the interim, say you're past the spreadsheet point and you're at that first inflection point, then you have to figure out, okay, what can I use that can be looking at my inventory across warehouses, that can be looking at my raw materials, that, looking at my turn rate. Sin7 is CIN and the number 7. They recently acquired a company called Deere that had actually been doing a really good job at that. And so they've expanded their offering. It's called Sin7 Core now. And that does a really good job, especially for manufacturing. If you have raw materials you're trying to track, it's really good. Again, that forecasting piece, I still think has a lot of unicorn magic and pixie dust in it. There's a younger company called Turbine that I think is doing a lot with inventory and forecasting. They're younger, more nimble. They're building out new features pretty quickly. So make sure you look at what all of your options are, and don't just, and this also goes to finding a 3PL. Do not Google. Talk to people, network, get on LinkedIn, get on Reddit, get in Slack groups, network, and ask, what is everybody using? There's a great, if you're on Shopify Plus, there's a great group in Facebook, the Shopify Plus community, and they are really active at sharing ideas with each other and sharing advice. And people will say, what do you think? What are you using for sales tax? And 5 people will give a response, and of those 5, 3 of them will go, happy to make a recommendation. So as you're scaling, do not be afraid to network with other business owners and ask a lot of questions.
I love that, because I think as a startup, sometimes you can get overwhelmed of when is it the right time to bring in some of these softwares and when should you approach them. So I think it's really nice to have some of those benchmarks. And even if you're not ready for one yet, now we know how to budget for that or what we should be looking at when it comes to building out our operations plan. So that's some super helpful tips. I know we started to touch on 3PLs a bit. Maybe we can dive into that next. So let's start to think about what kind of criteria these startups and founders should be thinking about when it comes to picking a 3PL partner. And I know you mentioned we can network and start to ask other founders, but how do we go about finding a 3PL partner? So what criteria and where should they look for them?
It's a great question. So I like to say when you're looking for a 3PL, like what Kathleen said, finding any groups that have already been through it is so important. Like people are willing to share their nightmares, like they really will. And like there's no need to remake the mistakes that someone else has made. So I think talking to friends that are in the industry, finding those groups, posting about them is super important. Then look at case studies. So we have a lot of case studies where it's like, we're a good fit for you as a 3PL, or maybe we're not. Because when you think of 3PL, and I'm going to steal this line from Kathleen because it's so true, it's not a vendor. The 3PL is a partner. Like it's very different. Don't just think I'm looking for the lowest. I give them $2, they throw a t-shirt in a bag. No, please do not think that way, because this is the last person who touches your product. And there will be delays in your supply chain, there will inevitably, and you're going to have to hit a sale. You're going to have an influencer event, and you're going to need to call that 3PL and say, like, you got to do me a solid right now. And we do this all the time where something comes up. So you want that to be a good relationship. Do not starve your 3PL. I think going at price, it should always be prices, be price sensitive, of course, but think about this as a 2-3 year relationship, because you don't want to be popping this around. You don't want to be moving your inventory around. You need to have someone who's been in business for a few years, if not more, and that has great technology. So that's kind of like my first start. And then the other part is, once you know that you're taking too much time to print labels and ship out of your garage versus marketing and growing your business, and that's anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 packages a month. Like once it's just too much for you, or you're not spending that time on growing the business and it's profitable, then outsource. Look to it around that. That's what we find is the sweet spot, is like 2,000 to 5,000, depending on how quickly you're growing and how sticky your return customers are. So again, I think the biggest takeaway is this is a partner, not a vendor. Be price conscious, but that should not be the driver. Like, do you trust this person, and are they going to do a solid? Are they going to stay after 8 o'clock at night because you said, okay, I got the address correction and the UPS truck has already left? Is someone on their team going to take that and directly inject it into the UPS system so that it gets there in time? Those are the things that you need to look at, because it is so important. You're going to be asking favors of them, and they're going to be, everyone makes mistakes. Fulfillment, that's the third thing. Fulfillment is not a game of perfect. It's like golf. If anyone here golfs, you just want to hit it in the fairway. You don't want any big issues. So I think it's being cost conscious, but also just making sure it's a partnership and really understanding that there's a give and take on both sides, and things will go wrong. And it's really about, will that founder, will that person that's representing that 3PL get on the phone with you and talk through what happened? Give you a root cause analysis. Like these are really important things, and to not just, go scorched earth quickly. So those are a couple of things that we always say, make sure as brands. And then the last thing is just make sure it's a good fit in where their warehouses are. If all of your customers are in the Pacific Northwest and it's a warehouse in Jacksonville, like Kathleen said, like, don't do that. That's like a zone 8 every day. Like, fine, you need a geographically a region that makes sense for you, so that you're sticking to zones 3 and 4. You don't want anything from like zone 5 to zone 8. I know UPS likes to charge us that, but it's, we want to make sure that we keep it that zone 1 to zone 5, because that's where you're going to get the best bang for your buck and keep your margin integrity up to par.
Well, and so I know some of you follow me on LinkedIn, and especially ladies who logistic. Also on my website, there's a whole article, a knowledge base about how to find a new 3PL. And it talks about all of the factors you need to consider, questions you need to ask. The bottom line is it's about communication, and that is upfront. You need to be super, super open and transparent about your ecosystem and your needs and what you have going on, including why you're leaving your existing warehouse if you are, so that when you're interviewing the new ones, they know if it's a fit too. We don't want either side to get into something that isn't going to work. Again, it's a partner, not a vendor. So, and as Maggie said, and you'll see if you read my article, price is the very last conversation. All the other stuff are first, because if a relationship is going to break down with a warehouse, it's not going to be over their invoices. It's going to be over the service and whether it's a right fit. So excessively communicating during the RFP process. I cannot stress that enough, that on both sides, communication needs to be so big and so open. And the first thing I always say, what I've already said today, do not Google. Do not Google. Somebody who has the most ad spend might not be the right fit for you. Network. Join Slack groups. There's Startup CPG. If you're a CPG company, there's a ton of Reddit groups, Slack groups, Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups. Ask each other, find out, get references. And then when you are talking to a warehouse, get back channel references. Maybe they give you 3 people they want you to talk to, but through your network, you can say, hey, has anybody else ever used LVK? And then 5 people will go, oh yeah, they're awesome. Here's the thing that happened with them that they did for me. So those are the really important things, is talking to the other brand owners and finding out, and even your software vendors, finding out who they like, which ones the technology works really seamlessly and smoothly with. I work for an order operations company called Pipe 17 that works with Maggie's team, and they do the omni-channel order management for moving orders around for companies that have multiple warehouses, multiple sales channels. Super important that technology is working well with the warehouses that are their partners. So if you're a customer of a software, ask them, hey, who's great? Who do you hear good things about? Who have you never heard someone leave? Who do you not hear complaints about? Because your software vendor is going to have a whole good list for you too.
I love that. Yeah, some really great considerations around thinking about that communication, how you're going to work with the team. There was a question that came in the chat actually about medical device startups. So I don't know if either of you have any tips for if there's maybe a medical device or regulated product, and maybe I know sometimes there needs to be temperature controlled warehouses or certain licenses. Any tips for navigating 3PLs that support medical device startups or more like regulations, if there's any tips there?
Yeah, so we actually worked with a company called Byte that was similar to Invisalign. So we got them from 200 orders a day to 2,000 orders a day. There's a couple things you always want to look at. If you're selling in the US, a lot of folks, and if you're using any sort of like Medicaid, Medicare programs for reimbursement. So if this is over your head, I'm sorry, I'll just take 2 minutes on it. So you need to then have HIPAA compliance and then also SOC 2 compliance. So very few WMSs, the technology that's in a 3PL can support this. So that is the one time I'd say, and I think Kathleen, you can back me up on this, where it might be okay to Google like SOC 2 compliant 3PLs or HIPAA compliant 3PLs, because they have to turn over that paperwork, because there are few and far between, especially as a startup, because they usually don't want to sign you up unless you're doing 500 to 1,000 orders a day, just because those compliance things that cost $50,000 to get implemented at any one warehouse. So I'm happy to take it more offline, because we've gone through this with a few different vendors. So I didn't see who in the chat it was, but I'll drop my LinkedIn in and I can kind of walk you through, because it is just very specific when it comes to that. But like SOC 2, HIPAA, and again, it depends on who's paying for it. If it's being paid, are you getting reimbursed by Medicare, or is it just like I'm buying it up?
Well, and on that same note, and this is import export across the board, compliance is everything. Knowing in advance what is going to be required to move something across border or even sell something in a certain country, like as Maggie mentioned, things that have FDA oversight. That's Federal Drug Administration here in the US. And there are a lot of things that do. Or if it's a baby product, there is oversight, and it will trigger an extra inspection at the border, which will cause a huge delay. I have a shipment being inspected right now, and they've given me an estimate of 60 days. There goes Christmas. So it's really critical to know in advance what to do for compliance. And there are some different tools for it. There's a company that it's invite only right now, but I know the CEO, if anybody's really interested, it's called True Identity, TRU Identity. They monitor all of the changing regulations and import requirements for the entire product catalog, and they can help you take on global compliance. So it's really important to make sure that your tools are in place, even if Your tools are you searching through the government websites of the places you want to import. Just make sure you know what certifications you have to have, what paperwork, what documentation, what certifications your manufacturer has to have, because you have to ask for those before they produce. If they don't have the certification, you cannot sell that product in that country. So again, don't be reactive, be super, super proactive on everything you're doing, whether it's a product you invented or a product you're having produced or a product you're buying. Make sure that you have checked all of the boxes so you know exactly what is required. You may think, oh, it's no big deal, it's a baby product. It's not something that has pieces that they could choke on. I'm going to be just fine. Well, if it's classified as a baby product, that thing's getting inspected. Doesn't matter what the product is. So it's important to know that. So this one that's stuck at customs, where I said goodbye Christmas, I ended up shipping 2 smaller packages straight to the owner's house of enough product to get them through. So they're fine. But the rest of it isn't coming for 2 more months because it's already 30 days into the inspection. But it's really important to have a backup plan. It's important to mitigate because stuff will get stuck. And so, make sure you think about that. If you're waiting on a manufacturer for product photography on a new product, don't wait for the whole shipment to get there. Ask them to send you 5. Plan ahead.
Mm-hmm. And that's a great tip on true identity and being able to track some of those regulations, because they are often changing, and it's important to keep track of them, and it can really impact your business. So I think these are some great tips that we should think about. I think I want to move over to manufacturing. We're kind of going backwards on the supply chain. We started at 3PL, now moving over to manufacture. What are some criteria when it comes to understanding which manufacturing partners, maybe for some people who maybe started a bit as a smaller scale, like if you're a food business making it at home, when is that point when you need to even bring on a big scale manufacturer, or maybe there's some that need to bring it on from the start? Any tips around finding those manufacturing partners as well?
So on that food product company, it's when you get a retailer that wants to buy from you, you can't keep making it at home. So you're going to need a co-packer when you get to that point. And CPG is its own different beast. And those of you who don't know what CPG is, consumer packaged goods. So it's things that are consumed quickly. So like food or cosmetics or healthcare products, anything that you buy and consume and then have to go replace it, as opposed to something that you buy and keep for a long time. So CPG has a lot of regulations on what has to be done for product safety and food safety. So again, back to that compliance thing, really important to know in advance and ask the questions of your manufacturer about their certifications. Again, baby products, are they certified to produce those? Have they been tested for certain levels of lead and other things like that? It's really important to ask all of those questions of any manufacturer. And I don't care if it's a manufacturer you're working with because somebody introduced you, or maybe you got on Alibaba and found the most perfect thing and emailed the manufacturer there. Ask for the certifications, because you could be thousands of dollars into producing and then not be able to get it into your country to sell it.
Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of regulatory consultants that can help you with this as well. So if that's something you're navigating with as a startup, you can maybe turn to some of those consultants who can help you what regulations you need to be meeting, what licenses your manufacturer needs to have, what are those compliance pieces. So definitely a lot of consultants out there that can help you map out that strategy as well. Maggie, any tips from you on finding manufacturers? Oh, and you're on mute as well.
When I need a tip on manufacturing, I go straight to Kathleen. So that's her wheelhouse. So yeah, I think the main thing for us is the deadlines. Like, give your 3PL, because we're touching it right from the manufacturer. Like, just give enough time for that handoff so there's not a lot of finger pointing. So that's my comment. But when it comes, Kathleen nailed it.
Awesome. I know we're starting to near the end of our webinar, which is crazy. I feel like it's going by so fast, and so many valuable resources and information are being shared. Miriam's been popping a lot of links into the chat as people are sharing different resources. So I think I want to bring the final question and ask both of you. I know maybe a lot of the startups in the room are getting a bit overwhelmed about, they got to think about compliance and manufacturers and 3PLs. And there's so much when it comes to building an operations plan. And maybe even some people only have 1 or 2 people working on their business. So if they had to take away one thing from this webinar, one thing to look into tomorrow or next week, or one thing they should start to think about and prioritize, what would be that last piece of advice or one thing they should prioritize and take away from the session today? And I can start with Maggie.
So simplify, simplify, simplify. Don't try to go into 3 countries at once. Focus on what you think you can get done. Keep your SKU, don't try to introduce new SKUs and go into a new country all at once. Like simplify, test and simplify, I think is the most important thing. Say, okay, I'm going to try, like Kathleen said, I'm going to go after the Northeast. I'm going to go after the Pacific Northwest. I'm going to just go direct to consumer first, while I'm also trying to maybe get a B2B sell via Target, but like, don't do everything. Just say, this is what I can do. I'm going to start on, if I can get these sales direct to consumer in the Northeast or in the Pacific Northwest or Texas, wherever it is, and then work from there. When you have too many goals on the board, you're going to forget all this stuff and you're going to be half done here, half done here. So again, simplify what you're going to do, what's going to make your business grow the fastest by like 1 or 2 things. Do not try to do multiple things at once, because something's going to fall and you want to see if something doesn't work in the Northeast, that's okay. Like then you scrap that one and you go to the next, but pick your target, aim, measure, boom, go. Like that's it. Don't try to do too many things at once.
So my advice, and this won't surprise you based on what we've been talking about, but it might surprise you because it's not about planning and it's not about putting your business together. Be humble. You don't know what you don't know, and you are in love with your product. But there are a lot of other people that know what you don't know. So as I said, find every Slack group. There's amazing women in e-commerce. There's startup CPG. Find Slack groups. Find LinkedIn groups. Find groups on Reddit. Join groups on Facebook. That Shopify Plus community is amazing. Ask questions and learn the things that you don't know, and ask as you're stumbling up against those things, instead of afterwards when you have tripped over it. So, that's part of that simplify and that pre-planning and that being proactive. Just have the humility to ask. Everybody else has been in the same position that you're in. I myself have been a startup founder and had some exits, which what led me to doing what I'm doing now, because I decided that, hey, I might as well use everything that I learned to help other brands. Well, there are lots of me's out there who have been through it, who've been a startup founder, who've stumbled and fallen and made mistakes and picked themselves back up and learned the hard way. So ask a lot of questions and pull your network in. Join that Ladies Who Logistic group if you are interested in it. It's a great group. There aren't very many of us in logistics, so it's kind of neat to see that. And this women's exporter program, feeds right into that. But there are lots and lots of groups. And if you have questions about any of the groups that I've talked about, or I probably have, 7 or 8 Slack groups, shoot me a note on LinkedIn and I will send you all the links. Some of them are by invitation, so I'll invite you. So just build your network, make it big.
I love that. 2 amazing tips to end off. Simplify, make sure you're focusing on what matters. And, you can build that into your growth roadmap. You can build that into your strategy, and network. We have this program. We have a number of other programs at Startup Canada, and we have a whole ecosystem map of all the different partners across Canada that you can be connecting with in different areas. And Miriam even dropped in our resource guide that we have as well. So there's so much out there to support you, whether it is some of the groups that Kathleen mentioned, or even some of the resources we have here. So thank you both so much for your time and your knowledge and your expertise that you shared with us today. This has been an absolutely amazing session, and I know we had amazing engagement in the chat, so everyone really appreciated you taking the time. Miriam's going to take a minute to put a feedback poll on screen, so if you just have a moment before you leave the webinar today, please rate. We want to make these as valuable as we can for all of you attending, so any feedback you share helps us to make sure that we make these sessions as valuable as possible. Our next webinar will actually be taking place in January. This is the last webinar of 2024 for the Women's Exporter Program for Startup Canada. So stay tuned. You can subscribe to our mailing list to see all of the other events and webinars that we have coming up, but this is the last one for 2024. So thank you to everyone who joined for sharing all of your engagement and resources. And again, to Felipe and to both of our speakers for sharing your time as well. I hope you have an amazing rest of your day and feel free to reach out with any questions.